Okay, so again, hopefully everyone can read these pretty well, and we'll go from there. So yesterday we did roughly half of these questions, and today we're going to jump in and do the other half, roughly half, and whenever we get through them, we'll just kind of go ahead and call it a day. Again, make sure that everyone's signing in the chat. And let's just kind of go ahead and get started with these practice questions. So we did numbers 2, 3, and 4 yesterday. So on this page here, we're just going to go back and do number 1. So we'll zoom way in on it here. So number 1 says the Germanic tribes that invaded the Roman Empire had relatively simple governments. There were few government officials and taxes. Rulers depended on the loyalty of their warriors rather than on a government bureaucracy. Germanic laws were based on custom and designed to prevent warfare between families. Okay, so a question just asks us, very similar to some of the questions we talked about yesterday, which of the following is the best title for the passage? In other words, summing everything up, okay? So let's look at our 4 choices. A, how Germanic tribes govern. B, Germanic tribes in the Roman Empire. C, the invasion of the Roman Empire. Or D, loyalty among the Germanic tribes. Okay, so let's see. Are there any there that we feel pretty strongly that we could eliminate, that don't seem like particularly strong answers? And bear with me while I'm flipping through my book. I have a sense of stuff. But the ones that strike me maybe as being the ones I would get rid of, C, the invasion of the Roman Empire. Okay. It says the Germanic tribes that invaded the Roman Empire. Then it doesn't talk about anything related to that invasion other than they were invaded by Germanic tribes. Okay. So I would say C doesn't seem like a very fitting title because the majority of the passage isn't talking about that. Okay. Same thing with D, loyalty among the Germanic tribes. The only place I can even see the word loyalty is in the sentence, rulers depended on the loyalty of their warriors rather than on a government bureaucracy. Okay, so again, too specific to really fully encapsulate what the whole passage is talking about. I'd say C and D aren't very good options for a title. A and B are getting a little bit closer. A, how Germanic tribes governed. B, Germanic tribes in the Roman Empire. Which one does the paragraph seem to be focused on more, right? Yes, they mention the Germanic tribes. Yes, the Roman Empire is mentioned, but the majority of the paragraph is talking about the ways in which Germanic tribes govern. So I'd say A is the best choice here. How Germanic tribes govern. Okay? Pretty straightforward. All right, let's go ahead and jump to the next set of questions I want to do. And I know that this timeline isn't the clearest, so I had it zoomed way in to begin with. And then when we go to the practice questions, I'll zoom out a little bit, but I want to at least read through this timeline with it zoomed in so you can see it, because it is very small and pretty blurry when I zoom out far enough to see the question. So this timeline stretches from 1450 to the year 1700. And then down here, we have these little bars that tell us something. So down in the key, as it's called, right, we have the darker bar that says Portuguese dominate trade in East Indies. That would be this section here, right? So what that key is saying is that from whatever year this is to the year 1600, Portuguese, people from Portugal, dominate trade in the East Indies. Now, this lighter colored bar says Spanish established empire in the Americas. So here, between here and here, right? So an overlapping time period, right? This would be when Spaniards or Spanish people established empire in the Americas. Okay. And then lastly, the white bar from 1600 to 1700, this part right here, this is saying Dutch, French, and English established their colonies. So this timeline is basically telling us those three general things, but then it's also pointing out all of these specific events that have happened along the way, right? So 1492, Columbus sails to America for Spain, or for Spain, right? In other words, on behalf of the country of Spain, right? 1498, da Gama sails to India for Portugal by going around Africa. Let's see, I'm not going to obsess about going in order. I'm going to try though. 1519 to 1521, Magellan expedition sails around the world. Year 1519, 1521. 1521, Cortez conquers Aztec Empire in Mexico for Spain. Down here in 1535, Pizarro conquers Inca Empire in South America for Spain. 1535, Cartier explores Cartier explores St. Lawrence River in North America for France. 1609, Hudson explores North America and then explores North America for the Netherlands and England. And 1673, Marquette and Joliet explore Mississippi River Valley for France. Okay, so those are the events that they mention. Okay, so let's look at some practice questions that deal with this time. So again, I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to zoom out as little as possible, so that hopefully we can kind of still read it. All right. So, well, I guess let's start with number 5 because I can do it easily. So 5 says Portugal dominated trade in the East Indies for most of the 1500s. Select the event on the timeline that most likely first triggered Portugal's superiority in the world. Or, sorry, in the region. Man, I'm having a tough time reading. Okay, so we're asked to make a guess or a prediction, or maybe not a prediction, an assumption, right? They tell us that from here to here, so majority of the 1500s, Portugal dominated trade in the East Indies. What event on this timeline most likely first triggered Portugal's superiority or power in that region? Okay, so why did Portugal dominate trade there? Well, let's look. Where do we see Portugal? Columbus sails to America for Spain, so that's definitely not it. Da Gama sails to India for Portugal by going around Africa. Okay. Cortez conquers Aztec Empire for Spain, blah, blah, blah. Now we're getting further and further. We see Magellan sailing around the world. No country is mentioned, Spain and Spain. So even though it is a stretch to assume this, the only one that makes any sense would be this one right here, right? Da Gama sails to India for Portugal by sailing around Africa, right? So the reason, simply because if it triggered it, that means it needs to be something that happened prior to, right? So this would be the only one that really makes any sense. So let's look at number 6. Again, hopefully I'm not going to zoom out too much. No, I'll just, if that's too far zoomed out, then I'm just going to read them and not worry if you can't see them perfectly, but I'll just do my best. So 6 says, which of the following statements is supported by information on the timeline? Done this many times before if you've been in social studies class, we've had questions very similar. A, Spanish and Portuguese domination of exploration gave way to that of the Dutch, French, and English. Okay. Sounds reasonable enough. We'll revisit it if we think it's maybe a possible right answer. B, Henry Hudson discovered more places in North America than Marquette and Joliet and Cartier. Okay, so that's a good example of one we can't prove based on this timeline, right? We know Hudson explored North America for Netherlands and England, and we know Marquette and Joliet explored the Mississippi River Valley for France, but we don't know, and we can't say that Hudson discovered more places than Marquette and Joliet. Okay? That's not, there's not that much information on here to be able to back that up, okay? So, C says both Cartier and da Gama explored North America on behalf of France, okay? Well, we know Cartier explored North America for France, but da Gama explored India for Portugal. So C, just a false statement. And D, French explorers cooperated with American Indians in establishing trade. Here's one that, again, is very likely true. That probably did happen. Okay? Is there anything on the timeline that tells us that that was the case or that backs that up? No. So we can't say that it is true. The only one that's supported is A. Spanish and Portuguese domination of exploration gave way to that of Dutch, French, and English. We know that because of these bars, right? Here's Portuguese domination, here's Spanish, right? They both happened first, and then from 1600 to 1700, after that, we see Dutch, French, and English colonies starting to become established. All right, so that's the only one that, based on this information, that we can verify. Okay, so let's look at number 7. Number 7 says, instead of financing expeditions themselves, the rulers of Spain allowed conquistadors to establish outposts in the Americas. The conquistador financed his own expedition, but if he succeeded, he was allowed to keep 4/5 of any treasure he found. Cortez was a conquistador who became rich by conquering the Aztecs in Mexico. Blank was also Gama, Pizarro, or Cartier. Okay, so what do we know about conquistadors? Okay. Well, based on what we read, we don't know a whole lot, but we know they come from what country? Conquistadors come from Spain. So that is the key to this question. If you can make that jump and say, okay, well, we need to find which of these other 3 also came from Spain. Did da Gama come from Spain? No. Da Gama came from Portugal. Did Pizarro come from Spain? Yes, Pizarro, it says in 1535, Pizarro conquers Inca Empire in South America for Spain. That implies to me that based on the information we have, that he was also a conquistador. And Cartier explored North America for France. So again, it's, even if we don't necessarily know, or even if it's not, even if it takes a certain amount of assumption, we can surely eliminate da Gama and Cartier because they're from different countries. Okay, so the right answer just presents itself to us. And last but not least, number 8 says, which of the following is the best title for the timeline? We've done these. Let's go through them. A, the Spanish explorers and empire. Okay. Well, they talk about, the timeline talks about a lot more countries than just Spain, so I'm going to say A probably isn't a good one. B, age of exploration. Sounds pretty good. C, history of the 16th and 17th centuries. Okay. Well, does this cover everything going on in history about the 16th and 17th century? Or does it just focus on exploration? Okay. I would say it just focuses on exploration. D, European colonies in the Americas. for the same reason that A is wrong, D is also wrong, because there are lots of other countries that are talked about other than the European colonies in the Americas, right? We talk about things all over that's too specific, right? So the only one that's general enough to kind of encompass everything would be B, the age of exploration. Okay? All right, how are we doing on time? Doing all right. So I've got a few more lined up. So let's go ahead and we're going to jump down to number 10. So I think we've got 3 more questions to go. Okay, so number 10 says, when establishing colonies, European nations wanted their colonies to to be economically self-sufficient. That meant that each colony paid for its government salaries and the cost of building and maintaining roads, railroads, and government buildings. To do this, European colonists or the colonial governments exported natural resources like gold or copper or grew cash crops like sugar or rubber. Which of the following statements is an opinion rather than a fact? Okay, we haven't done one of these questions in a while. So anytime I get a question that deals with opinion versus fact, I'm looking for words that give it away, right? I feel like we all know what the difference between an opinion and a fact is, okay? So when something is stated as fact, it's stated a certain way. When something is stated as an opinion, it's stated and worded a certain way also. So be looking and be thinking about that, excuse me, as we read through this. A, European countries had similar goals in establishing their colonies. Okay? Doesn't sound particularly opinionated, but let's leave it alone. B, colonies should be economically independent. So now there's a key word that stands out to me, right? The word should, right? Just using that word implies an opinion, right? Because whoever is writing it is saying that you should do this, right? Which by definition is an opinion. Okay? So B seems pretty good, but let's make sure C and D don't stand out first, and then we'll move on. C says European nations built railroads, roads, and government buildings in their colonies. Pretty straightforward, very factual, right? Not an opinion. And D, colonies provided natural resources that colonists could exploit. Again, not worded particularly opinionated, right? So opinion versus fact, always be on the lookout for giveaway words, right? Should, colonies should be economically independent. That should make this one stand out, right? So B is our right answer here. Enough? Let's do these last 2, and they talk about 2 totally different things. 13 and 14. So, it says, according to experts in world agriculture, poor nutrition and starvation of millions of people stems not from a global scarcity of resources, but from the uneven distribution of resources among nations. Experts claim the world has the resources to feed its population if the political will of the richer nations were brought to bear on this problem. Which of the following is an opinion rather than a fact? Perfect. Same question as last time. Use the same strategy, right? Look for the words that give it away. Okay? And this is an example of a question that's very wordy, very lengthy, right? Boring to read. Some words don't necessarily make sense if you don't, if you don't have the vocabulary to know what all of these words mean. You might read this question and then just shut down and think, oh crap, I can't. Right? But really, I think any of you could easily tell me the difference between an opinion and a fact, and whether or not you perfectly understand what the paragraph is saying doesn't matter here. So don't be so quick to give up on a question, because as I was reading it, I was like glazing over and thinking, man, this is a boring question. Then you get to the actual question and realize, I don't really even need to know anything about what I just read. So sometimes that happens. So just, like I said, if you go in with that mindset of, I'm going to do whatever I can to get the question right, you're going to be more successful and you're going to feel less overwhelmed, right? So let's just pick out which of these is opinion rather than fact. A, millions of people worldwide are undernourished. Okay? That's stated factually, right? There's not a lot of opinion to that. B, the world has abundant natural resources. Similar, right? Now, someone could argue against that, but the way that it's stated factually. C, natural resources are distributed unevenly among nations. Okay. D, the problem of feeding the world's population is a matter of political will rather than one of resources. Okay. So, what do we think? Which of these answers is the one that seems most opinionated, right? So this one is a little harder than the last one. In other words, our choices are not quite as cut and dry, okay? So like I had said, A and B would be the first two I'd get rid of because they are pretty factual, right? And they're definitely not stated in the way that an opinion is stated. C, natural resources are distributed unevenly among nations. I feel like that's pretty factual also, right? Someone could argue against it, but people argue against facts all the time, right? As we probably well know, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean that it is an opinion just because someone can argue against it, right? Facts are things that can be supported by data and proven to be true or not. So someone could argue these, but the first three things are things that I could pull out data to back up and say, I have this information that says A, B, C are factual, are true thing, right? D is really the one that's left to, be thought of as kind of an opinion, right? The problem of feeding the world's population is a matter of political will rather than one of resources. Again, that could be true, but again, the word here that I look out for is the problem, right? The problem with X or the problem with Y, right? The fact that the author is saying that implies a certain amount of opinion, right? Because as we know, any problem really has multiple ways to solve, right? And so this person is saying that in their opinion, the problem of world hunger is a political issue rather than an issue of resources. Okay? So again, not as easy and as cut and dry as the last one, but hopefully, even if you don't feel like D is a great answer, hopefully you can at least eliminate A, B, and C because the way they're worded is very factual, right? And D, not so much. And then the last question we have for today is number 14. And number 14 says, right, there we go. The 2000 census showed that the United States has 281,421,906 people, an increase of 13.2% over the 1990 census. Population growth and immigration accounted for this increase. The state population counts showed the largest relative gains in the South and West, with Nevada's population increase at 66.3 being the highest. That is a lot, right? Because state population figures are used to allocate seats in the House of Representatives, every 10 years a shift in the political power occurs. In 2000, states in the Northeast and Midwest lost seats. States in the West and the South picked up seats. Which of the following is implied by the paragraph? So again, implied means not directly stated, right? So let's look and see. A, Nevada had a 66.3% population increase. That is a fact pulled right out of the paragraph. So that's not something that was implied. It was directly stated. B, Nevada gained seats in the House. Did it say that specifically? No. Okay, so that could be right. Let's look at C and D. C, people moved away from the Northeast and the Midwest. Okay. That's tricky because it does say the state population counts showed the largest relative gains in the South and the West. Now, it doesn't necessarily, and then down here in the bottom, it says states in the Northeast and Midwest lost seats. Here's where we need to be careful. That's not directly implied. People moved away from the Northeast and Midwest. It just means that proportionately, populations were growing more in the South and the West than they were in the Northeast and the Midwest. Doesn't necessarily mean people were leaving those areas. It just means the population there wasn't growing as quickly. So that's an assumption that we may likely make. And C is a very tricky answer for that reason, right? It almost tricked me. So we have to read them carefully, and we have to make sure that they're backed up by logic and information from the parent. And lastly, D, the US population in 2000 was about 281 million people, which again was directly stated, so we know that wasn't the answer, right? That is not something that was implied. So the one that was implied is actually B, right? It told us Nevada had a 66% population increase, and then it told us that because state populations are used to allocate seats, every 10 years a shift occurs, and so we're left to then put those two dots together and say Nevada had a big population increase, therefore they must have gained some seats in the House. So there you go. B is the answer. But again, C, very tricky. Very tricky option. Okay, so with that, I know we're just a couple minutes shy of a half an hour, but that's fine. That's all I've got for social studies today. Monday, we will start a brand new topic and probably go through one last section of social studies stuff before we wrap up with spring quarter and take a couple weeks off before summer. And just like I mentioned in math class earlier while I was covering for Sean, just make sure you're checking in with us regularly to keep updated on what classes will look like once we return in July. I think July 1 is the first day of summer quarter. So again, just make sure you're checking in with us or checking in with someone to make sure that you are ready for whatever classes end up like when we come back from our little 2 weeks. All right, with that said, that's all I've got. Tune into Martin for reading if you need help with reading, and I will be back with science at 1:15 to end the week. So have a good one. All right, bye.